Would you do if you were given to a feared Viking lord as punishment for your parents' mistakes? Freya never had a choice, but what happened next defied every expectation. Her fate was supposed to be sealed, or so everyone thought. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The storm had been raging for 3 days when they came for her. Freya, Harold's daughter, stood at the narrow window of her family's longhouse, watching the gray waves crash against the rocky shore of their coastal settlement in what would one day be known as Norway. The wind howled through the wooden slats, carrying with it the salt spray and the distant cries of seabirds seeking shelter from the tempest. Her fingers traced the rough timber frame as she contemplated the fate that awaited her, a fate sealed by her parents' transgression against the most powerful jarl in the region. She was 19 summers old, with hair the color of honey that fell in thick waves past her shoulders, and eyes as blue as the summer sky over the fjords. Her features were delicate yet strong, with high cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw that spoke of inner resilience. Despite the simple wool dress she wore, dyed a deep green and fastened at the shoulders with bronze brooches, there was an unmistakable grace in her bearing that drew the eye of anyone who looked upon her. The circumstances that led to this moment had unfolded with terrible swiftness. Her father, Harold, was a merchant who had grown too ambitious for his own good. He had borrowed heavily from Jarl Ragnar Ironside to fund a trading expedition to the east, promising rich returns of silver, amber, and furs. But the voyage had ended in disaster when raiders attacked the trading party, making off with most of the goods and leaving Harold with nothing but debts he could never repay. The Jarl had demanded recompense, and when her father could not provide it, Ragnar had made a cruel decision that sent shockwaves through their small community. Freya would be given to Jarl Leif Stormborn as settlement of the debt, not as a wife, but as a thrall, a slave to serve in his household until such time as he deemed the debt paid. The arrangement was legal under their laws, though it filled Freya with a mixture of dread and anger that burned in her chest like hot coals. She had heard stories of Jarl Leif, the warrior lord who ruled the northern territories with an iron fist. They said he was as fierce as the winter wolves, as merciless as the sea and storm, and that he had personally led raids that left entire villages in ashes. Her mother, Sigrid, had wept for days when the judgment was pronounced. She had tried to plead with Jarl Ragnar, had offered everything they possessed, but the man's heart was as hard as stone. Harold had withdrawn into himself, unable to meet his daughter's eyes, the shame of his failure written clearly across his weathered face. Freya had watched her parents suffer and had made peace with her fate in her own way. She would endure whatever came, she told herself. She would survive, as her ancestors had survived through countless hardships before her. The sound of horses approaching cut through the howling wind. Freya's heart quickened as she saw the group of riders emerge from the tree line, their cloaks billowing behind them like dark wings. There were 6 of them, all warriors by the look of their bearing and the weapons strapped to their sides. At their head rode a man who could only be one of Jarl Leif's senior men, tasked with collecting her and bringing her to his lord's hall. Her mother rushed to her side, grasping her hands with desperate strength. Sigrid's face was pale and drawn, her eyes red from endless tears. She was still a handsome woman, despite the hardship that had aged her beyond her years, with the same honey-colored hair as her daughter, though threaded now with silver. "Freya, my precious child," Sigrid whispered, her voice breaking. "I would give anything to spare you from this. Anything." Freya squeezed her mother's hands, summoning a strength she did not truly feel. "I know, Mother. This is not your fault, nor Father's. Fortune turned against us, that is all. I will endure whatever comes. I am stronger than you think." Harold approached slowly, his shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible burden. He was a tall man who had once stood proud, but now he seemed diminished, broken by the consequences of his choices. His beard, once neatly trimmed, had grown wild and unkempt, and his eyes held a haunted quality that pained Freya to see. "Daughter," he began, but his voice failed him. He tried again, struggling with words that seemed inadequate for the enormity of what was happening. "I have failed you in the worst way a father can fail. I thought I could build a better future for our family, but my ambition has brought you to ruin instead. If I could take your place, I would do so without hesitation." The knock on the door came hard and insistent, 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through the longhouse like hammer blows. Harold moved to answer it, his movement slow and reluctant, like a man walking to his own execution. The warrior who entered was a man of perhaps 40 winters, with a scarred face and gray-streaked hair braided in the warrior style. His name was Gunnar, and he was known throughout the region as one of Jarl Leif's most trusted men. His eyes swept the interior of the longhouse, taking in every detail with the practiced gaze of a veteran fighter before settling on Freya. "You are Freya Haraldsdottir?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer. "I am," Freya replied, lifting her chin and meeting his gaze directly. She would not cower or show weakness before these men. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with dignity. Gunnar nodded, a flicker of something that might have been respect passing across his features. "Gather whatever belongings you wish to bring. We ride within the hour. Jarl Leif expects you before nightfall tomorrow." Her mother helped her pack a small chest with her few possessions. Several changes of clothing, a comb carved from bone that had belonged to her grandmother, a small knife for eating, and a length of fine embroidered cloth she had been working on for her eventual wedding. The irony of that last item was not lost on Freya, as she carefully folded it and placed it in the chest. Whatever future she had imagined for herself was gone now, replaced by uncertainty and servitude. The farewell was brief and painful. Her mother clung to her, whispering prayers to the gods for her protection and safekeeping. Her father stood apart, unable to approach, his face a mask of anguish and shame. Freya went to him, placing a hand on his arm. "I forgive you, father," she said softly, though she was not certain if the words were true or simply what needed to be said. "What is done. We cannot change it now." Harold's face crumpled, and for a moment she thought he might collapse. Instead, he pulled her into a fierce embrace, his body shaking with silent sobs. Then he released her and turned away, unable to watch as she departed. The journey to Jarl Leif's settlement took them through dense forests of pine and birch, along paths that wound between towering cliffs, and across streams swollen with spring meltwater. Freya rode a sturdy mare, her small chest of belongings secured behind the saddle. The warriors spoke little, maintaining a watchful silence as they traveled. Gunnar occasionally pointed out landmarks or warned of difficult terrain ahead, but otherwise seemed content to let the miles pass in quiet contemplation. As they traveled, Freya found her thoughts turning again and again to what awaited her at journey's end. She knew that thralls could be treated in many different ways, depending on the temperament of their masters. Some were worked to death in the fields or used cruelly for the amusement of their owners. Others were treated with a measure of kindness and eventually earned their freedom through loyal service. She had no way of knowing which fate would be hers, no way to predict what kind of man Jarl Leif truly was beneath the fearsome reputation. They stopped for the night in a small clearing where the warriors built a fire and shared provisions of dried meat, hard bread, and ale. One of the younger warriors, a man named Eric with kind eyes and a ready smile, offered Freya an extra portion of food and a warm cloak against the chill of the evening. "Do not judge Jarl Leif by the stories you have heard," Eric said quietly as he settled beside the fire. "Men speak of his fierceness in battle, and that is true enough. But there is more to him than violence and conquest. He is a man of honor who values loyalty and courage above all else." Freya studied the young warrior's face, searching for signs of deception or false comfort, but found only sincerity. "You speak as one who admires him greatly." Eric nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. "I was 15 when my village was destroyed by raiders from across the sea. They killed my parents and most of my kinsmen. Jarl Leif and his men arrived in time to save those of us who remained. He could have left us to fend for ourselves, but instead he brought us to his settlement, gave us homes and purpose. I have served him for 6 years now, and I have never regretted my oath of loyalty." The words provided some small comfort, though Freya remained cautious about placing too much hope in them. Men could be kind to their warriors and cruel to their slaves. The two were not mutually exclusive. The second day of travel brought them to higher ground, where the forest thinned and they could see the landscape stretching out before them. In the distance, Freya caught her first glimpse of Jarl Leif's settlement, a collection of longhouses and smaller buildings clustered around a natural harbor. Even from this distance, she could see that it was larger and more prosperous than her own village had been, with several ships drawn up on the shore and smoke rising from many hearths. As they descended toward the settlement, more details became visible. The main hall was an impressive structure, its roof supported by massive timber beams, and its walls adorned with carved designs of serpents and wolves. Around it stood the homes of the Jarl's warriors and craftsmen, along with storehouses, workshops, and animal pens. People moved about their business, pausing to watch as the riding party approached. Freya felt the weight of their stares as Gunnar led them through the settlement toward the main hall. She kept her back straight and her expression calm, refusing to show the fear that churned in her stomach. Whatever happened next, she would face it with courage. She was the daughter of merchants, descended from a long line of survivors who had endured hardship and emerged stronger for it. She would not shame their memory by showing weakness now. They dismounted before the great hall, and Gunnar gestured for Freya to follow him. The massive wooden doors stood open, revealing the interior of the hall where firelight danced across the walls, and the scent of roasting meat filled the air. Long tables lined the sides of the hall, and at the far end, elevated on a platform, sat the Jarl's high seat. And there, rising to his feet as they entered, was Jarl Leif Stormborn himself. He was unlike anything Freya had imagined. Where she had pictured a grizzled, scarred brute, she instead saw a man in his late 20s, tall and powerfully built with the physique of a warrior in his prime. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, worn long and partially braided in the style of the northern Jarls. His features were strong and well-formed, with a straight nose, high cheekbones, and a jawline that spoke of both strength and nobility. But it was his eyes that caught and held her attention, gray as storm clouds and just as turbulent, holding an intelligence and intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. He wore a tunic of deep blue wool embroidered with silver thread, over which he had fastened a thick leather belt decorated with silver fittings. At his side hung a magnificent sword, its pommel wrapped in wire of silver and gold. He looked every inch the powerful Jarl he was reputed to be, but there was something in his bearing that suggested more than simple brutality. There was control, discipline, and a kind of watchful assessment that made Freya feel as though he could see straight through to her very soul. "Jarl Leif," Gunnar said, bowing his head respectfully. "I have brought the girl as you commanded. This is Freya Harald's daughter of Harald the merchant." Leif descended from the platform, his movements fluid and purposeful. He approached Freya, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes, and she fought the urge to look away, to show any sign of intimidation. Instead, she met his gaze directly, her chin raised in silent defiance even as her heart hammered against her ribs. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hall had fallen silent, all eyes on the tableau unfolding before them. Then Leif spoke, his voice deep and resonant, carrying easily through the space. "So you are the payment for your father's debt," he said, and there was something unreadable in his tone. "Tell me, Freya Harald's daughter, did you come here willingly, or were you dragged from your home in chains?" The question surprised her. She had expected commands, perhaps questions about her skills or abilities, but not this. She chose her words carefully, aware that everything she said now might influence how she was treated in the days to come. "I came because the law demanded it, and because I would not see my family suffer further shame for my refusal," she replied, her voice steady despite her nervousness. Leif's expression remained unreadable as he circled her slowly, his boots echoing on the packed earth floor of the hall. Freya could feel the intensity of his scrutiny, could sense the weight of judgment in his gaze as he assessed her. She forced herself to remain still, to not flinch or turn away from his examination, though every instinct screamed at her to show deference, to lower her eyes in submission. "You speak boldly for one who comes to me as a thrall," Leif observed, stopping before her once more. His voice held neither anger nor approval, merely statement of fact. Most would grovel and beg for mercy. Most would weep and curse their fate. Yet you stand before me with your head held high, as if you were a visiting dignitary rather than payment for a debt. Freya felt a flash of defiance surge through her chest, momentarily overpowering her fear. "Would you prefer that I grovel, my lord? I can play that part if it pleases you. But I thought that men of the North valued courage over cowardice, strength over weakness. My father's debt has cost me my freedom, but it has not cost me my dignity. That I will keep, unless you choose to take it from me by force." A ripple of surprise passed through the assembled warriors who lined the hall. Several exchanged glances, and Freya heard a low whistle from somewhere in the shadows. Gunnar's weathered face showed something that might have been concern, or perhaps admiration. She had spoken rashly, she knew, had perhaps sealed her own fate with words that could be interpreted as defiance or disrespect, but she would not take them back, would not diminish herself merely to avoid punishment. For several heartbeats, Leif simply stared at her, his gray eyes unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been the ghost of a smile. It transformed his features, softening the harsh lines and revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the fearsome reputation. Courage or foolishness, he mused, almost to himself. Time will tell which. He turned to address the hall at large, his voice carrying the weight of command. Let it be known that Freya Haraldsdottir is under my protection. Any man who lays a hand on her in violence or dishonor will answer to me personally. She is to be given quarters in the women's section of the hall and provided with proper clothing and provisions. He looked back at Freya, and now there was something calculating in his expression, as if he were working through some complex problem in his mind. You will not work in the fields or stables. Instead, you will serve in the hall itself, attending to the household needs and assisting the other women with their duties. Can you read and write? The question caught Freya off guard. Literacy was not common among her people, reserved mostly for those who dealt in trade or scholarship. I can, my lord. My father taught me both the runes and the letters used by the traders from the south. He said that knowledge of writing was as valuable as knowledge of numbers in commerce. Something flickered in Leif's eyes, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Good. Then you will also assist my skald, Olaf, with the keeping of records and the copying of sagas. He grows old and his eyes weaken. Your literacy will prove useful. He gestured to a woman who had been standing near the hearth, watching the proceedings with keen interest. She was perhaps 40 winters old, with iron-gray hair braided in an elaborate style and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Despite the simple nature of her clothing, there was an air of authority about her that spoke of her position within the household. Hilda is the head of my household, Leif explained. She manages the hall and oversees the women's work. You will answer to her in all things domestic. Hilda, see that she is settled and instructed in her duties. Hilda stepped forward, inclining her head respectfully to Leif before turning her attention to Freya. Her expression was neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile, but assessing. Come with me, girl. We have much to discuss, and the evening meal will not prepare itself. Freya followed Hilda through the hall, acutely aware of the eyes that tracked her movement. The warriors at the tables watched with varying degrees of interest and speculation, while the serving women cast curious glances in her direction. She kept her gaze forward, refusing to show any weakness or uncertainty, as they made their way to the rear of the hall and through a doorway into the women's quarters. The room beyond was smaller than the main hall, but still spacious, with sleeping benches arranged along the walls and a central hearth that provided warmth. Several women were present, engaged in various tasks, such as spinning, weaving, and mending clothing. They looked up as Hilda entered, their conversations dying away as they took in the sight of the newcomer. This is Freya, Hilda announced without preamble. She comes to us as settlement for her father's debt to Jarl Ragnar, and has been given to our lord as a thrall. She will be sleeping here and working alongside you in the service of the household. I expect you all to instruct her in our ways and see that she understands what is expected of her. One of the younger women, a pretty girl with auburn hair and freckles across her nose, stepped forward with a friendly smile. I am Inga, she said warmly. You look exhausted from your journey. Come, I will show you where you can put your things and help you get settled. Freya felt a wave of gratitude toward this stranger who offered kindness when she might have expected hostility or indifference. She followed Inga to a sleeping bench near the back of the room, where there was a wooden chest for storing personal belongings and furs piled for warmth during the cold nights. Do not let Hilda's stern manner frighten you, Inga said quietly as she helped Freya unpack her small chest. She is strict but fair, and she protects those under her charge. As long as you work hard and cause no trouble, she will treat you well. Another woman approached, older than Inga but younger than Hilda, with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that held both wisdom and warmth. I am Thora, she introduced herself. I have served in this household for 15 years, first as a thrall like yourself, and now as a free woman. Jarl Leif is not like other lords. He values capability and loyalty, and he rewards those who serve him well. If you prove yourself useful and trustworthy, You may find your circumstances improve greatly." The words offered hope, a small light in the darkness of uncertainty that had consumed Freya since learning of her fate. She wanted to believe them, wanted to think that perhaps her situation was not as dire as she had feared, but she had learned to be cautious with hope, to not let it blind her to reality or make her vulnerable to disappointment. Over the next hours, as the household prepared for the evening meal, Freya learned the rhythms and routines of life in Jarl Leif's hall. The women worked with practiced efficiency, each knowing her role and executing it without need for constant supervision. Inga showed her where supplies were kept, how the tables were to be arranged, and the proper way to serve the warriors who would gather for the meal. "The Jarl sits at the high table with his most trusted men," Inga explained as they carried platters of food from the cooking areas to the main hall. "Gunnar always sits at his right hand, and Sven, his second in command, sits at his left. The other warriors are arranged according to their rank and standing, with the newest and youngest near the doors. We serve the high table first, then work our way down. Never speak unless spoken to, and never linger longer than necessary at any table." The evening meal was a lively affair, with the hall filling with warriors fresh from their training and day's work. They came in loud and boisterous, their voices raised in conversation and laughter as they took their places at the long tables. The scent of roasted meat, fresh bread, and ale filled the air, mixing with the smoke from the central hearth and the torches that lined the walls. Freya moved among the tables with a platter of bread, her heart racing as she approached the high table where Leif sat in conversation with Gunnar and several other senior warriors. She could feel his presence like a physical weight, could sense his awareness of her even though he did not immediately look in her direction. When she placed the bread before him and turned to retreat, his voice stopped her. "Freya." He spoke her name quietly, but with enough force that she immediately halted and turned back to face him. "Gunnar tells me that you showed great composure during the journey here, that you did not complain or cause difficulty despite the circumstances. Is this true?" She was surprised that he would ask such a question in front of his men, surprised that he seemed to care about her behavior during the journey. "I saw no purpose in complaint, my lord. What is done is done. Making the journey miserable for your men would have served no one." One of the warriors at the table, a massive man with a thick red beard and arms like tree trunks, let out a bark of laughter. "She has spirit, this one. Not many thralls would speak so boldly to the Jarl, especially on their first day." Leif's expression remained thoughtful as he studied her. "Spirit can be either an asset or a liability, depending on how it is directed. We shall see which proves true in your case." He gestured for her to continue her work, effectively dismissing her, and Freya retreated with relief and confusion warring in her chest. As the evening wore on and the ale flowed freely, the atmosphere in the hall grew more relaxed and jovial. Warriors told stories of past battles and raids, their voices rising in competition as each tried to outdo the others with tales of bravery and glory. The women moved among them, keeping the platters full and the ale horns filled, while also joining in the laughter when the stories grew particularly outrageous or amusing. Freya found herself watching Leif when she thought he would not notice, studying the way he interacted with his men. He commanded their respect without effort, his presence alone enough to quiet arguments or settle disputes. But she also saw moments of warmth and humor, saw him laugh at a well-told joke or clap a warrior on the shoulder in approval of some deed or accomplishment. He was not the brutal tyrant she had feared, but nor was he soft or weak. He was something more complex, more nuanced, and infinitely more interesting. Later, when the warriors had begun to drift away to their own quarters and the hall was being cleared of the evening's debris, Hilda called Freya aside. They stood near the hearth, where the fire had burned down to glowing coals, and the older woman's face was illuminated by the soft orange light. "You did well tonight," Hilda said, her tone matter-of-fact but not unkind. "You worked hard and caused no trouble. That is all that is required of you, at least for now. But I will give you some advice. Girl to girl, woman to woman. Be careful around the Jarl." Freya felt her stomach tighten with apprehension. Is he known to misuse the women in his household?" Hilda's expression softened slightly, and she shook her head. "No, that is not what I mean. Jarl Leif is a man of honor who does not force himself on unwilling women, thrall or otherwise. But I have seen the way he looks at you, and I have seen the way you look at him when you think no one is watching. There is something there, something that could become dangerous for you both if it is not carefully managed. The word struck Freya like a physical blow. She wanted to deny it, wanted to insist that Hilda was mistaken, but she could not quite bring herself to lie. There was something about Leif that drew her attention, something that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts scatter when he looked at her. It was foolish and dangerous, she knew, to feel any attraction to the man who held power over her fate, but feelings did not always obey the dictates of reason. "I am a thrall," Freya said quietly, forcing herself to face the reality of her situation. "Whatever I might feel or not feel is irrelevant. My life is not my own, and I have no say in what becomes of me." Hilda reached out and placed a weathered hand on Freya's shoulder, her grip firm, but not unkind. "You are a thrall now, yes, but things can change. As I told you earlier, Jarl Leif values ability and loyalty. Prove yourself worthy of his trust, and you may find that your circumstances improve. But tread carefully, child. The path between thrall and free woman is fraught with dangers, and the heart is the most treacherous territory of all." That night, as Freya lay on her sleeping bench surrounded by the soft breathing of the other women, she found sleep elusive. Her mind replayed the events of the day, from the painful farewell, to her parents, to her first meeting with Leif, from the nervous hours serving in the hall, to Hilda's warning about the danger of her own feelings. She thought about her future, about what lay ahead in this strange new life, and she wondered if she would have the strength to endure whatever trials awaited her. Through the partition that separated the women's quarters from the main hall, she could hear the sound of movement, the low murmur of voices as the night watch was set and the last of the warriors settled for sleep. Somewhere in that hall, Leif, too, was preparing for rest, and she wondered if his thoughts turned to her as hers turned to him. It was a foolish thought, she knew, the kind of fantasy that led only to heartache and disappointment. He was a jarl, a powerful lord with responsibilities and concerns far beyond the fate of one thrall girl. She was nothing to him, merely a debt paid, a transaction completed. And yet, when she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, her dreams were filled with storm-gray eyes and the ghost of a smile that had transformed a fearsome warrior's face into something altogether more human and infinitely more dangerous to her peace of mind. The days that followed established a routine that Freya slowly adapted to. She rose each morning before dawn, helping the other women prepare the morning meal and attending to the countless tasks required to maintain a household of such size. There was always work to be done, bread to be baked, clothes to be washed and mended, floors to be swept, ale to be brewed, and meals to be prepared for the dozens of people who lived within or were sustained by the Jarl's hall. But true to his word, Leif also had her spend several hours each day with Olaf the Skald, an elderly man with a long white beard and eyes that sparkled with intelligence despite their failing sight. Olaf had served the Jarls of this region for more than 40 years, keeping their histories, recording their deeds, and composing the songs and sagas that would preserve their memories for future generations. "So you are the girl with the gift for letters," Olaf said when Freya first presented herself at his small chamber off the main hall. The room was cluttered with wooden tablets, parchment scraps, and various writing implements, creating an organized chaos that seemed to suit the old man perfectly. "Leif tells me you learned from your merchant father. Show me what you can do." He set her to copying a passage from an old saga, watching critically as she formed the letters with careful precision. When she had finished, he examined her work with approval, nodding slowly. "Good, very good. Your hand is clear and steady, and you have a feel for the rhythm of the words. This will do nicely. We have much work ahead of us, girl. I have been tasked with recording the history of the Jarls of this region going back 3 generations, and my eyes grow dim. You will be my hands, and together we will create something that will last long after we have both returned to the earth." The work with Olaf became one of the few bright spots in Freya's new life. She found peace in the careful formation of letters, in the preservation of stories and histories. The old Skald was a font of knowledge, sharing tales of heroes and gods, of battles and alliances, of love and betrayal. He treated her not as a thrall, but as a student, and in his presence she could almost forget the circumstances that had brought her to this place. The spring weeks passed with surprising swiftness, each day flowing into the next in a rhythm of work and rest that Freya found oddly comforting despite her status as a thrall. The settlement came alive with activity as the weather warmed and the ice melted from the harbor. Ships were prepared for the trading season, fields were readied for planting, and warriors trained with renewed vigor in anticipation of the raiding season that would come with summer. Freya's position in the household gradually became more defined, and, to her surprise, more privileged than she had expected. Her work with Olaf took up increasing amounts of her time, as the old skald's eyesight continued to deteriorate, and he relied more heavily on her assistance. She spent mornings helping with household tasks alongside the other women, but her afternoons were dedicated to the preservation of knowledge, to the careful recording of histories and sagas that Olaf dictated from memory. It was during one of these afternoon sessions, nearly a month after her arrival, that Leif entered Olaf's chamber unannounced. Freya had been so focused on her work, carefully copying a particularly complex passage about the founding of the settlement, that she did not notice his presence until his shadow fell across the parchment before her. She looked up with a start, her heart immediately beginning to race at his proximity. He stood close enough that she could see the fine details of his face, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his dark hair caught the light from the oil lamp, the intensity in those storm-gray eyes as they focused on the work before her. "My lord," she said, starting to rise from her seat, but he gestured for her to remain where she was. "Continue your work," he instructed, moving around the table to examine what she had written. "I merely came to see how Olaf's project progresses." Olaf, who had been dozing in his chair by the small hearth, stirred at the sound of Leif's voice. "Ah, my Jarl. Come to check on your investment, have you? Well, I can tell you that the girl has proven herself invaluable. Her hand is steady, her attention to detail impeccable, and she has a natural feeling for the rhythm and flow of the old stories. With her help, we will complete the full history within the year." Leif picked up one of the completed pages, examining it carefully. Freya watched him read, noting the way his eyes moved across the text, the slight furrow of concentration that appeared between his brows. He was not merely glancing at her work, she realized, but truly reading it, comprehending and evaluating what she had written. "This is excellent work," he said finally, setting the page down with care. "The formation of the letters is clear and consistent, and you have captured Olaf's voice well. Tell me, Freya, do you enjoy this work?" The question surprised her. In the month she had been at the settlement, Leif had spoken to her only rarely, brief exchanges during meals or passing encounters in the hall. He had been polite but distant, treating her no differently than he treated any other member of his household. This sudden personal interest was unexpected and slightly unsettling. "I do, my lord," she answered honestly. "There is something deeply satisfying about preserving these stories, about knowing that the deeds and words of those who came before will not be lost to time. My father used to say that a people without history are like a ship without an anchor, adrift on the currents with no way to know where they have been or where they should go." Something flickered in Leif's eyes, an emotion she could not quite identify. "Your father was a wise man, despite his poor judgment in matters of commerce. It is a shame that his wisdom did not extend to his business dealings." The words stung, even though they were true. Freya felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of shame and anger, emotions that warred within her chest. She wanted to defend her father, to explain the circumstances that had led to his downfall, but she knew that doing so would be pointless. The past could not be changed, and explanations would not alter her current circumstances. "My father made mistakes," she said quietly, keeping her eyes focused on the parchment before her, rather than meeting Leif's gaze. "But he was a good man who loved his family and tried his best to provide for them. That his best was not enough does not diminish the goodness of his intentions." Leif was silent for a long moment, and when Freya finally dared to look up at him, she found him studying her with an expression that was difficult to read. There was something softer in his features now, something that spoke of understanding rather than judgment. "You are loyal to those who have hurt you," he observed. "That speaks well of your character, even if it also suggests a certain blindness to the faults of those you love." Before Freya could formulate a response, Olaf cleared his throat pointedly. "If you two are quite finished with your philosophical discussion, perhaps we could return to the matter at hand. I have a saga that needs completing, and the afternoon grows short." Leif smiled slightly at the old man's interruption, and Freya saw again that transformation of his features that made him seem less the fearsome warrior and more simply a man. "Of course, Olaf. I would not dream of interfering with your important work." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway and looked back at Freya. "You have done well here. Continue as you have been, and your service will be noted and remembered." After he had gone, Olaf chuckled softly to himself. "The Jarl takes an interest in your progress. That is good, very good indeed. He is not a man who wastes attention on those he does not value." Freya felt her cheeks grow warm again, though this time the cause was different. "He values my ability to write clearly, nothing more. I am useful to him as a scribe, just as I am useful to you. If you truly believe that, then you are not as observant as I thought," Olaf said with another chuckle. "But perhaps it is better that you do not see what is as plain as day to these old eyes. Some things are safer left unacknowledged, at least for now." The old skald's words echoed Hilda's warning from weeks earlier, and Freya found herself disturbed by the implications. She did not want to believe that there was anything between herself and Leif beyond the relationship of master and thrall. To acknowledge any other possibility was to open herself to hope, and hope was dangerous. It made one vulnerable, made one believe in possibilities that might never come to fruition. That evening, as Freya helped serve the evening meal in the great hall, she found herself acutely aware of Leif's presence at the high table. She tried to focus on her duties, tried to keep her attention on the tasks at hand, but her eyes kept drifting toward him of their own accord. She watched the way he spoke with his warriors, the easy confidence in his bearing, the respect that others showed him not out of fear but out of genuine loyalty and admiration. During a lull in the serving, as the warriors were engaged in their meals and conversation, Freya found herself standing near the hearth, momentarily unoccupied. She was lost in thought, her mind turning over the events of the afternoon, when a voice beside her made her start. "You seem troubled." It was Sven, Leif's second-in-command, a man of perhaps 35 winters with dark blonde hair and shrewd blue eyes. He was known throughout the settlement as a capable warrior and a fair judge of character, one of the few men whose counsel Leif sought regularly. "I am simply tired, my lord," Freya replied, using the honorific that was appropriate for a man of his rank. "The work of the day weighs upon me." Sven studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "The Jarl speaks highly of your work with Olaf. He says you have a gift for the written word and a dedication to your tasks that is rare among thralls. Such qualities do not go unnoticed or unrewarded in this household." Freya was unsure how to respond to this. Was Sven simply making conversation, or was there some deeper purpose to his words? She had learned in her weeks at the settlement that conversations in the Jarl's hall were often layered with meanings beyond the surface, that politics and positioning were constant undercurrents in the daily life of those who served great lords. "I do what is asked of me to the best of my ability," she said carefully. "It is all that any thrall can do." Sven smiled slightly, a knowing expression that suggested he understood far more than she had said. "Indeed. But some thralls do only what is required and no more, while others, like yourself, exceed expectations and demonstrate qualities that transcend their station. The Jarl notices such things, and he values them." Before Freya could respond, Inga appeared at her side, catching her arm gently. "Freya, we need help bringing the next course from the kitchens. Come, quickly." Freya excused herself and followed Inga, grateful for the interruption even as she puzzled over the meaning of Sven's words. In the relative privacy of the passage leading to the kitchens, Inga pulled her aside, her expression concerned. "Be careful, Freya," she whispered urgently. "Sven is a good man, but he is also the Jarl's closest advisor. If he is speaking to you about Leif's regard for you, it means that others have noticed as well. There are those in this household who would not look kindly on a thrall rising above her station, who would see any favor shown to you as a threat or an insult." Freya felt a chill run through her despite the warmth of the hall. "I seek no favor, Inga. I simply do my work and try to stay out of trouble. I know that, and you know that. But perception matters more than intention in places like this," Inga replied, her voice still low and urgent. "Just be careful, watch your back, and do not give anyone reason to speak against you. There are women here who have been in service far longer than you, who hope to catch the Jarl's eye for themselves, and they will not take kindly to a newcomer who seems to have achieved what they could not." The warning troubled Freya deeply. She had been so focused on adapting to her new life, on performing her duties adequately and avoiding punishment, that she had not considered the political complexities that might surround her position. The realization that she might be the subject of jealousy or resentment among the other women was unsettling, particularly since she had done nothing to invite such attention. Over the following days, Freya became more aware of the undercurrents in the household. She noticed the way some of the women watched her when she left for her afternoon sessions with Olaf, saw the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, felt the cool distance that had developed between herself and several of the serving women who had initially been friendly. There was one woman in particular, a beautiful blonde named Ragnhild, who seemed to regard Freya with particular hostility. Ragnhild had been in the household for several years and was known for her ambition and her desire to become more than just a serving woman. She was skilled at catching the attention of warriors and had, according to Inga's whispered gossip, set her sights on Leif himself, hoping to become his concubine, or perhaps even his wife. The confrontation came unexpectedly one afternoon as Freya was returning from her work with Olaf. She found her sleeping area in disarray, her carefully folded clothes scattered across the floor, her precious bone comb broken into pieces, and the embroidered cloth she had brought from home torn and stained with mud. Freya stood frozen, staring at the destruction of her few belongings, feeling tears of anger and frustration burning behind her eyes. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Ragnhild standing there, a satisfied smile playing about her lips. "Oh, how unfortunate," Ragnhild said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It seems someone has made a mess of your things. How careless of them." Freya's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms as she fought to control her temper. "You did this. Why? What have I done to earn your hatred?" Ragnhild's smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of cold anger. "You come here as a thrall, the lowest of the low, and yet you act as though you are something special. You spend your afternoons in comfort with the old skald while the rest of us work. The Jarl speaks to you, looks at you, notices you, when there are others far more deserving of his attention. You need to remember your place, thrall. You are nothing, and you will always be nothing, no matter how prettily you write your letters or how sweetly you smile." The venom in Ragnhild's voice was shocking in its intensity, and Freya realized that Inga's warnings had not been exaggerated. This woman saw her as a genuine threat, as competition for something that Ragnhild believed should be hers by right. "I seek no favor from the Jarl," Freya said quietly, forcing herself to speak calmly, despite the anger that burned in her chest. "I do the work assigned to me, nothing more. If others choose to see something else in that, it is their problem, not mine." "Your very presence is a problem," Ragnhild hissed, stepping closer. "You think you are so clever, so special, but you are just another thrall, another piece of property to be used and discarded. The sooner you accept that, the easier your life will be." "Is there a problem here?" Hilda's voice cut through the tension like a blade. The older woman stood in the doorway, her expression stern as she took in the scene before her. Freya's destroyed belongings scattered across the floor, Ragnhild standing close to Freya with hostility written clearly across her features. Ragnhild immediately stepped back, her expression shifting to one of innocence. "No problem, Hilda. I was just helping Freya clean up this mess. It seems someone knocked over her chest while she was away." Hilda's sharp eyes moved from Ragnhild to Freya and back again. The older woman was no fool, and it was clear from her expression that she understood exactly what had transpired. "Ragnhild, you are needed in the kitchens immediately. There is work that requires your attention." It was a dismissal, clear and unmistakable. Ragnhild's jaw tightened, but she knew better than to argue with Hilda. She cast one last venomous look at Freya before sweeping out of the room, her posture radiating barely suppressed anger. Hilda waited until Ragnhild's footsteps had faded completely before turning her full attention to Freya. The older woman knelt beside the scattered belongings, her weathered hands picking up the pieces of the broken comb, with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with her normally stern demeanor. "This was your grandmother's, was it not?" Hilda asked softly, examining the delicate bone carved with intricate patterns that now lay in fragments. Freya nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. The comb had been one of her few connections to her past, to the life she had left behind. Seeing it destroyed felt like losing a piece of herself, a severing of ties that already felt too fragile. "Ragnhild has always been ambitious," Hilda said, continuing to gather the scattered items. "She came to this household 5 years ago, the daughter of a minor landowner who had fallen on hard times. She has worked hard to improve her position, and she has set her heart on catching the Jarl's attention. Your arrival, and the favor he has shown you, threatens everything she has been working toward. I have done nothing to seek his favor, Freya protested, kneeling down to help collect her belongings. I simply do the work assigned to me. And that is precisely what makes you dangerous to her, Hilda replied. Ragnhild has tried every trick and strategy she knows to attract Leif's notice. She has made herself beautiful, has demonstrated her skills in managing household affairs, has positioned herself where he cannot help but see her, and yet, despite all her efforts, he barely acknowledges her existence. Then you arrive, making no effort at all, and he notices you immediately. Can you not see how that would breed resentment? Freya sat back on her heels, the ruined embroidered cloth clutched in her hands. It had been a piece she had been working on for months, intended as part of her wedding dowry in the life she had once imagined for herself. Now it was just another casualty of the conflict she had unwittingly become part of. What should I do? She asked quietly. I cannot change who I am or the work I have been assigned. Should I deliberately perform poorly to avoid notice? Should I make myself small and insignificant? Hilda's expression softened, and she reached out to place a hand on Freya's shoulder. No, child. That would serve no purpose and would only waste the gifts you have been given. But you must be more aware of the currents around you, more careful about how you conduct yourself. Do not give anyone ammunition to use against you. Be respectful to all, show no favoritism, and guard your reactions when in the Jarl's presence. That evening, as Freya served in the great hall, she was acutely conscious of every movement, every word, every glance. She kept her eyes lowered when approaching the high table, spoke only when spoken to, and retreated as quickly as propriety allowed. If Leif noticed the change in her demeanor, he gave no sign, continuing his conversations with his warriors as if nothing were amiss. But after the meal, when the hall had begun to empty and the warriors were drifting away to their various pursuits, Leif called her name. Freya's heart sank as she turned to face him, very aware of the eyes that watched this interaction, of Ragnhild standing near the hearth with barely concealed fury on her face. "My lord?" Freya said, keeping her voice neutral and her expression carefully blank. "Walk with me," Leif commanded, rising from his seat and moving toward the doors that led to the outside. It was not a request, but an order, and Freya had no choice but to follow, even as she felt the weight of hostile stares burning into her back. The evening air was cool and fresh after the warmth and smoke of the hall. The sun was setting over the harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the settlement was settling into the quiet rhythms of night. Leif walked in silence for several moments, leading her away from the hall toward the edge of the settlement, where they could overlook the sea. Finally he stopped and turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "You have been avoiding me." The directness of the statement caught Freya off guard. She had thought she had been subtle in her efforts to maintain distance, but apparently not subtle enough to escape his notice. "I am a thrall, my lord," she said carefully. "It is not my place to seek your company or attention. I serve where I am told to serve and do what I am told to do." "That is not what I asked," Leif replied, his voice firm but not angry. "I asked why you have been avoiding me. Just this morning when I came to Olaf's chamber, you barely looked at me. During the meal tonight, you served my table as if I were a stranger you had never met. What has changed?" Freya struggled to find words that would be truthful without being inflammatory, that would explain her actions without revealing too much of the complicated politics she had become entangled in. "I have been advised that my interactions with you have been noted by others in the household, and that such notice could be problematic." Leif's jaw tightened, and she saw a flash of something that might have been anger in his eyes. "Problematic for whom? For you or for those who are jealous of the position you have earned through your own merit and hard work? Does it matter?" Freya asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was too bold, too familiar, but she was tired of dancing around the truth. "My lord, I am grateful for the work you have given me with Olaf. It has made my situation far better than I had any right to expect. But that very favor has made me a target for those who believe I have risen above my station or who resent what they perceive as preferential treatment. And so you think the solution is to make yourself invisible, to pretend that we have no connection beyond that of master and thrall?" Leif's voice had an edge to it now, a frustration that surprised her. "I had thought you braver than that, Freya Harald's daughter." I had thought you were the woman who stood before me on your first day and refused to grovel, who spoke of keeping her dignity even in bondage. His words stung because they were true. She had been allowing fear and caution to override the courage she had once claimed to possess. She had been letting others dictate her behavior, letting their jealousy and resentment make her small and afraid. "You are right," she admitted quietly, forcing herself to meet his gaze despite the intensity she found there. "I have been a coward. I let the threats and hostility of others make me forget who I am and what I value. But forgive me, my lord, for being uncertain how to navigate these waters. I am a thrall in your household, dependent on your goodwill for even the basic necessities of life. The line between proper conduct and presumption is one I do not know how to walk." Leif was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face as if looking for something hidden beneath the surface. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost gentle. "I will tell you a truth, Freya, though it complicates both our lives. From the moment you walked into my hall with your head held high and defiance burning in your eyes, you have occupied my thoughts in ways that are neither simple nor easily dismissed. I see in you a strength and spirit that is rare, a quality of character that has nothing to do with birth or station, and yes, that notice, that regard, is dangerous for you. I am not blind to the politics of my own household, or to the jealousies that my attention might provoke." Freya's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected, had even been warned, but hearing him acknowledge it so openly was something else entirely. It made real what had been merely speculation, gave substance to possibilities that she had tried to deny. "Then, what would you have me do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How can I serve you honorably while also protecting myself from those who would use your regard for me as a weapon?" "By being exactly who you are," Leif replied. "By refusing to be diminished or made small by the fears and resentments of others. And by trusting that I will protect you from any harm that might come your way because of my attention." He reached out and gently took her hand, a gesture so unexpected and intimate that Freya felt her pulse quicken. His hand was warm and calloused from years of wielding weapons, but his touch was gentle, careful, as if she were something precious that might break under too much pressure. "I cannot offer you what you deserve," he continued, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that sent shivers through her entire body. "The circumstances of your arrival, the debt that brought you here, the laws and customs that govern our world, all of these things create barriers that cannot be easily overcome. But I will not pretend that you mean nothing to me, and I will not allow others to harm you because of what I feel." Freya knew she should pull her hand away, should step back and restore the proper distance between them. But she found herself frozen, caught between desire and duty, between what her heart wanted and what her mind told her was wise. "My lord," she began, but he shook his head. "When we are alone like this, away from the hall and prying eyes, call me Leif. Let there be at least this small space where we can be simply ourselves, without the weight of station and circumstance between us." "Leif?" she said, testing the name on her tongue, feeling the intimacy of using it without title or formality. "This is dangerous for both of us. You are Jarl, leader of your people, responsible for the welfare of everyone in your care. I am a thrall, property, someone with no rights or standing. Whatever might exist between us can only lead to complications and conflicts that neither of us needs." "I know," he admitted, but he did not release her hand. "Believe me, I have told myself all of these things and more. I have tried to maintain distance, to treat you as I would any other member of my household. But I find that my will, strong as it may be in matters of war and governance, is not strong enough to deny what I feel when I look at you." The confession was stunning in its honesty and vulnerability. This was not the fearsome warrior lord speaking, but simply a man struggling with feelings he had not asked for and did not know how to manage. Freya felt her own defenses crumbling in the face of such openness. "I feel it too," she whispered, the admission terrifying and liberating in equal measure. "From that first day, when I saw you and you were nothing like what I had expected, something shifted inside me. I have tried to ignore it, to focus on my work and my duties, but it is always there, lurking beneath the surface, making my heart race whenever you are near." Leif's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch feather-light and achingly tender. "Then we find ourselves in an impossible situation. We cannot act on what we feel. at least not in any way that would be recognized or accepted by the world around us. But neither can we simply pretend these feelings do not exist. They stood there in the gathering darkness, the sound of the sea providing a backdrop to the silence that stretched between them. Freya could feel the warmth of his body so close to hers, could see the conflict in his eyes as he struggled with the same desires and restraints that she felt. "We must be careful," she said finally, forcing herself to be the voice of reason, even as every part of her wanted to throw caution aside. "We cannot give fuel to those who already resent my presence here. We cannot create a scandal that would undermine your authority or make my position here untenable." "Agreed," Leif said, though his tone suggested the agreement cost him something. "We will maintain propriety in public. Your work with Olaf will continue as before, and I will conduct myself toward you with the same respect I show all members of my household. But in moments like this, when circumstances allow, we will have the truth between us." He released her hand slowly as if reluctant to break the contact, and stepped back to restore a more appropriate distance between them. The loss of his touch felt like a physical ache, but Freya understood the necessity of it. "I should return to the hall," she said, though she made no immediate move to leave. "My absence will be noted and questions will be asked." "Go then," Leif said softly. "But know this, Freya Haraldsdottir, I will find a way to change your circumstances. I do not yet know how, but I swear to you on my honor that you will not remain a thrall forever. You deserve freedom, and I will see that you have it." The promise was like a beacon of hope in the darkness, but Freya knew better than to place too much faith in it. Changing someone's status from thrall to free was not impossible, but it was complicated, requiring either the payment of a substantial sum to settle the original debt or some act of extraordinary service that would justify manumission. Neither seemed likely in the near term. Still, as she made her way back to the hall, her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. Whatever complications and dangers lay ahead, she now knew that Leif's regard for her was genuine, that the connection she felt was reciprocated. It was dangerous knowledge, the kind that could lead to heartbreak and disaster, but it was also precious, a secret treasure to be guarded and cherished. When she entered the women's quarters, she found Inga waiting for her, the younger woman's face anxious with concern. "Where have you been?" Inga whispered urgently, pulling Freya aside. "Ragnhild has been spreading poison about you, telling anyone who will listen that you have been meeting secretly with the Jarl, that you are attempting to seduce him into elevating your position." Freya felt her stomach drop at Inga's words. The very thing she and Leif had just agreed to avoid was already being weaponized against her, twisted into something sordid and calculating. She sank onto her sleeping bench, her mind racing as she tried to determine the best way to counter the rumors that were undoubtedly spreading through the household like wildfire. "What exactly has she been saying?" Freya asked, keeping her voice low to avoid being overheard by any of the other women who might be listening. Inga glanced around nervously before sitting beside her. "She claims that you have been using your position with Olaf as an excuse to move freely through the hall, that you deliberately position yourself where the Jarl will notice you, and that tonight you followed him outside for a private meeting. She is painting you as an ambitious schemer who seeks to use her beauty and cunning to rise above her station." The accuracy of some of these accusations, particularly the part about the private meeting, made Freya's blood run cold. How had Ragnhild known? Had someone seen them leave the hall together? The settlement was not large, and eyes were everywhere, watching, judging, reporting back to those who had reason to care about such things. "The Jarl did speak with me this evening," Freya admitted, deciding that honesty with Inga was the safest course. The young woman had been nothing but kind to her, and she deserved to know at least part of the truth. "He wished to discuss my work with Olaf and to ensure that I was settling well into the household. There was nothing improper about the conversation." It was not entirely a lie, though it was certainly not the whole truth either. But Freya could not bring herself to share the intimate details of what had passed between herself and Leif, could not risk having those precious moments twisted and misrepresented by those who would use them against her. Inga studied her face for a long moment, and Freya saw understanding dawn in the younger woman's eyes. "You care for him," she said softly, and it was not a question but a statement of fact. "And he cares for you. Oh, Freya, this is even more dangerous than I thought." Before Freya could respond, Hilda entered the women's quarters, her expression grave. "Freya, come with me. The Jarl wishes to speak with you in the presence of the household elders. Now." The summons sent a spike of fear through Freya's chest. A formal meeting with the elders suggested that Ragnhild's accusations had already reached ears that mattered, that the situation had escalated beyond simple household gossip into something more serious. She rose on shaking legs and followed Hilda through the hall to a smaller chamber where important matters of governance and justice were typically discussed. Leif stood near the hearth, his expression carefully neutral, while three elderly men sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle. These were the respected elders of the settlement, men whose wisdom and experience gave them authority in matters of law and custom. Also present was Sven, standing slightly behind Leif, and to Freya's dismay, Ragnhild herself, standing with her hands folded demurely before her and her eyes downcast in a perfect imitation of humble concern. "Freya Harald's daughter," one of the elders began, a white-haired man named Orm who was known for his stern interpretation of the law. "You have been accused of improper conduct, of attempting to use your position in this household to seduce the Jarl and advance yourself beyond your station as a thrall. What do you say to these charges?" Freya forced herself to remain calm, to think clearly despite the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She could feel Leif's eyes on her, could sense the tension in his posture, even though he maintained his outward composure. This was a test, she realized, a challenge that would determine not just her immediate future, but potentially the course of both their lives. "I say that the charges are false," Freya replied, keeping her voice steady and clear. "I have conducted myself with propriety at all times. I performed the duties assigned to me by Hilda in the household and by Olaf in his work preserving the histories of this region. I have never sought private meetings with the Jarl, nor have I attempted to use my position to gain favor or advancement." "And yet," Orm continued, his sharp eyes fixed on her face, "you were seen leaving the hall this evening in the company of Jarl Leif, walking together toward the edge of the settlement. How do you explain this if not as evidence of improper intimacy?" Freya chose her words carefully, aware that she walked a razor's edge between truth and discretion. "The Jarl wished to discuss my progress in Olaf's service and to assess whether I was performing my duties adequately. He asked me to walk with him while we spoke, as the hall was crowded and loud. Our conversation was entirely proper and focused on matters of work." "Can anyone corroborate this account?" another elder asked, a man named Bjarne, whose reputation for fairness gave Freya a small measure of hope. Before Freya could respond, Leif spoke, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I can corroborate it, as I was present for the entirety of the conversation. Freya speaks the truth. I wished to discuss her work away from the noise and distraction of the hall. There was nothing improper in our interaction." Ragnhild's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with anger before she quickly schooled her expression back to one of concerned innocence. "Forgive me, my lord, but is it not unusual for a Jarl to take such personal interest in the work of a thrall? Surely you have men who manage such matters on your behalf. Why would you personally need to discuss such things with her?" It was a clever thrust, Freya had to admit. Ragnhild had framed her question in a way that seemed reasonable while simultaneously implying that Leif's attention to her was indeed inappropriate and suspect. Leif's expression hardened slightly, and Freya saw the warrior lord emerge, the man who commanded respect and obedience through sheer force of will. "I take interest in all aspects of my household, particularly in matters that relate to the preservation of our history and culture. Olaf's work is important to me personally, and I make it my business to ensure that he has the support he needs. Freya's skills are considerable, and I wish to ensure that she understood the importance of the task she has been given. Is there something wrong with a Jarl taking pride in the work being done in his name?" The challenge in his voice was unmistakable, and Ragnhild wisely lowered her eyes and remained silent. But the damage had been done. The elders exchanged glances, and Freya could see the doubt and concern in their faces. They might believe that nothing improper had occurred, but the very fact that such questions were being raised was problematic. Orm stroked his long white beard thoughtfully. "Jarl Leif, we do not question your judgment or your right to manage your household as you see fit. However, the appearance of impropriety can be as damaging as actual wrongdoing. For the sake of your reputation and the stability of your household, might it be wise to implement some safeguards to prevent further accusations?" Freya saw Leif's jaw tighten, saw the frustration flash across his features before he brought himself under control. He knew, as she did, that the elders were not wrong. Perception mattered in a world where a Jarl's authority rested not just on strength, but on the respect and support of his people. "What do you suggest?" Leif asked, his tone carefully neutral. Bjarne leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. Perhaps another person should be present when you wish to discuss matters with Freya. Olaf himself, or Hilda, or even Sven. This would ensure that there could be no question of impropriety and would protect both you and the girl from malicious gossip. It was a reasonable suggestion, one that Leif could not refuse without raising even more suspicion. Freya saw him struggle with the response, saw the conflict in his eyes as he weighed his options. "Very well," he said finally. "In the future, any discussions I have with Freya regarding her work will be conducted in the presence of at least one other person. Does this satisfy your concerns?" The elders nodded their approval, and Orm turned his attention back to Freya. "As for you, girl, you are fortunate that the Jarl vouches for your conduct. But you would be wise to be more mindful of appearances. A thrall must be above reproach in all things, for you have no standing or reputation of your own to shield you from accusations. Do you understand?" "I understand, my lord," Freya replied, bowing her head in acknowledgement of his authority. "Then this matter is settled," Bjarne declared. "The accusations against Freya are dismissed as unfounded, but precautions will be put in place to prevent future concerns. Ragnhild, you have done your duty in bringing your concerns forward, but you must also be careful not to spread unfounded gossip that could damage reputations. Is this clear?" Ragnhild bowed her head submissively, but not before Freya caught the flash of fury in her eyes. She had not succeeded in getting Freya expelled from the household or punished, but she had achieved something almost as valuable. She had created restrictions that would make it much more difficult for Freya and Leif to spend time alone together. As the meeting dispersed, Freya made her way back to the women's quarters, her emotions a turbulent mix of relief and frustration. She had survived the immediate crisis, but at a cost. The freedom she had enjoyed, the precious moments of privacy with Leif, were now gone, replaced by constant supervision and watchful eyes. Inga was waiting for her, along with Thora and several other women who had become friendly toward her over the weeks. They gathered around her with expressions of concern and support, and Freya felt a surge of gratitude for these women who had chosen to stand by her despite the risks. "You handled yourself well in there," Thora said quietly. "Many would have crumbled under such questioning, but you remained strong and spoke truthfully. That takes courage." "Ragnhild will not forgive this," Inga added, her voice worried. "She wanted to see you cast out or at least thoroughly humiliated. Now she will be even more determined to find some way to harm you." Freya nodded, accepting the truth of this assessment. She had made an enemy, one who would not rest until she had achieved her goal of either destroying Freya's position in the household or driving her away entirely. The following days were tense and difficult. Freya continued her work with Olaf, but now Hilda, or one of the senior serving women, was always present, ostensibly to assist but actually to serve as chaperone and witness. When Leif visited to check on their progress, his interactions with Freya were brief and formal, conducted entirely in the presence of others, and focused strictly on matters of work. The loss of their private moments was like a wound that refused to heal. Freya found herself longing for the simple intimacy of their conversation by the sea, for the warmth of his hand holding hers, for the vulnerability and honesty they had shared. But such things were now impossible, at least for the foreseeable future. She threw herself into her work with renewed dedication, spending long hours copying manuscripts and helping Olaf organize the vast collection of stories and histories he had accumulated over his decades of service. The old skald seemed to sense her distress, though he was too tactful to comment on it directly. "You know," Olaf said one afternoon as they worked together in his chamber, Hilda sitting quietly in the corner with her mending, "there are many kinds of prisons in this world. Some are made of iron and stone, while others are made of law and custom. But the cruelest prisons are those we build for ourselves in our own minds, the walls we erect because we fear what others might think or say." Freya looked up from the manuscript she was copying, meeting the old man's rheumy eyes. Despite his failing vision, she had the sense that he saw far more clearly than most. "Are you speaking of me or of someone else?" she asked carefully. Olaf smiled, a knowing expression that suggested he understood more than anyone gave him credit for. "I am speaking of all of us who allow fear to dictate our choices, who choose safety over happiness because we are afraid of the consequences of reaching for what we truly want. But I am also speaking of patience, of understanding that some things cannot be rushed, that the right outcome sometimes requires time and careful planning. Before Freya could respond, there was a commotion in the hall outside, the sound of raised voices and running feet. Hilda set aside her mending and moved to the door, opening it to investigate the source of the disturbance. A moment later, she turned back to them, her face grave. "Raiders have been spotted approaching from the south," she announced. "A trading ship that was returning to port saw their longships and raced ahead to warn us. Jarl Leif is calling all warriors to prepare for defense." Freya's blood ran cold. Raids were a constant threat in their world, a danger that every settlement faced. The spring and summer months brought not just favorable weather for farming and trade, but also for those who sought to take by force what others had built through hard work. The settlement erupted into controlled chaos as warriors gathered their weapons and armor, as women and children were moved to safer locations, and as defenses were prepared. Freya found herself assigned to help in the storage areas, ensuring that food and supplies were secured, and that water was available for fighting fires should the raiders attempt to burn buildings. As she worked alongside the other women, carrying sacks of grain and barrels of water, she caught glimpses of the warriors preparing for battle. Leif stood at the center of the activity, his presence commanding and assured as he directed the defense. He had donned his battle gear, a coat of mail that gleamed in the afternoon sun, a helmet decorated with bronze fittings, and his magnificent sword strapped to his side. He looked every inch the warrior lord, fierce and formidable, and Freya's heart clenched with fear for his safety. The raiders came with the afternoon tide, 3 longships cutting through the gray waters of the harbor with brutal efficiency. From her position helping to secure supplies in one of the storage buildings, Freya could see the dragon-headed prows of the enemy vessels as they approached the shore. Her hands trembled as she worked, but she forced herself to focus on the tasks at hand, knowing that panic would serve no purpose. Leif had positioned his warriors strategically along the shoreline and throughout the settlement, creating a defensive perimeter designed to funnel the attackers into killing zones where they could be most effectively engaged. It was clear that this was not his first battle, that he had the experience and tactical knowledge necessary to give his people the best chance of survival. The clash of battle began as the raiders beached their ships and charged forward with weapons raised and war cries echoing across the settlement. The sound was terrifying. A cacophony of screaming men, clashing metal, and the thud of weapons striking shields. Freya watched from the relative safety of the storage building as Leif led his warriors forward to meet the attack, his sword flashing in the sunlight as he cut down the first raider to come within range. He fought with a savage grace that was mesmerizing to behold, his movements fluid and precise, each strike calculated for maximum efficiency. Around him, his warriors fought with equal determination, forming a wall of shields and steel that the raiders broke against like waves against a cliff. But the enemy was numerous and determined, and despite the fierce resistance, they managed to push deeper into the settlement. Buildings caught fire as the raiders used torches to create chaos and confusion, and the air filled with smoke that made breathing difficult and visibility poor. Hilda appeared at Freya's side, her face grim but composed. "We need to move the children to the underground storage chambers beneath the main hall. They will be safer there if the raiders break through the defenses. Come, help me organize the evacuation." Freya followed the older woman, helping to gather the frightened children and their mothers, guiding them through the smoke and chaos toward the relative safety of the hall. As they moved through the settlement, Freya saw scenes of desperate combat, saw warriors she had served meals to now fighting for their lives, saw the horrible cost of violence written in blood on the ground. They had just gotten the last of the children into the underground chambers when a cry went up from near the hall. A group of raiders had broken through the defensive line and were charging toward the main building, clearly intending to loot the Jarl's residence and perhaps take hostages. Freya's heart seized with terror as she realized that the women and children hiding below were now in immediate danger. Leif appeared as if summoned by her fear, leading a group of his best warriors in a countercharge that intercepted the raiders before they could reach the hall. The fighting was brutal and close, the kind of desperate struggle where skill and strength meant the difference between life and death. Freya watched in horror as Leif engaged with the enemy leader, a massive man wielding a huge battle axe with terrifying proficiency. The duel between them was fierce, both men fighting with the knowledge that defeat meant death. Leif's swordwork was masterful, his strikes precise and powerful, but his opponent was strong and experienced, absorbing blows that would have felled a lesser warrior and returning them with crushing force. Then Freya saw it, the moment when Leif's attention was divided for just a heartbeat as he shouted orders to his men. The enemy leader seized the opportunity, bringing his axe around in a vicious arc aimed at Leif's unprotected side. Time seemed to slow as Freya watched the blow descending, her voice catching in her throat as she tried to scream a warning. But Leif was already moving, his warrior instinct saving him where conscious thought might have failed. He twisted aside at the last possible moment, the axe blade passing so close to his body that it tore through the mail at his side. Using the enemy's overextension against him, Leif brought his sword up in a devastating counter that ended the duel with brutal finality. The death of their leader seemed to break something in the raiders' resolve. They began to fall back, their retreat turning into a rout as Leif's warriors pressed their advantage. The enemy fled back to their ships, leaving behind their dead and wounded in their haste to escape. As the last raider pushed off from shore, a ragged cheer went up from the defenders, the sound of men who had faced death and survived. Freya found herself running toward Leif before she even realized she had moved, her heart pounding with fear and relief in equal measure. He stood among his warriors, blood-spattered and breathing hard, but alive and apparently uninjured despite the torn mail at his side. When he saw her approaching, his expression shifted from the cold focus of battle to something warmer, more human. "Freya," he said, his voice hoarse from shouting commands during the fight. "Are you hurt? Were any of the women or children harmed?" She shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the full weight of what had nearly happened crashed down upon her. She had come terrifyingly close to losing him, to watching him die before her eyes, and the realization left her shaking with reaction. Leif seemed to understand what she was feeling. Despite the presence of his warriors and the eyes of the entire settlement upon them, he reached out and gently grasped her arm, his touch grounding and reassuring. "I am well," he said quietly, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "It takes more than a few raiders to end my story." Sven approached, interrupting the moment with his characteristic timing. "My Jarl, we have casualties that need tending." Gunnar took a sword thrust to the shoulder, and several others have wounds that require attention. "Also, we need to organize patrols to ensure the raiders do not return and to check for any who might be hiding in the surrounding area." Leif nodded, his focus shifting back to his responsibilities as leader. But before he turned away, he looked at Freya one more time, and in that look, she saw everything he could not say in this public moment. Relief that she was safe, gratitude that she had cared enough to fear for him, and a longing for the privacy to speak honestly about what they meant to each other. The rest of the day was consumed with the aftermath of the raid. The wounded were tended to, the dead were counted and prepared for burial, and the damage to the settlement was assessed and repairs begun. Freya worked alongside the other women, helping to clean and bandage wounds, prepare food for the exhausted warriors, and restore some semblance of order to the chaos the raiders had left behind. As evening fell and the immediate crisis had been managed, Leif called a gathering in the great hall. The warriors assembled, along with the elders and senior members of the household, to discuss what had happened and to plan for the future. "Today we faced a serious threat, and we prevailed," Leif began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "You all fought with courage and skill, and because of your efforts, we suffered minimal losses while inflicting severe casualties on our enemies. But this attack reveals a larger problem. The raiders knew where to strike and when we would be most vulnerable. This suggests that they had information about our settlement, perhaps from traders or spies who have been watching us." Orm, the eldest of the council members, nodded gravely. "We must increase our vigilance and our defenses. More guards on the approaches to the settlement, better coordination with neighboring communities to share information about raider movements, and perhaps even preemptive strikes against known raider bases before they can launch attacks against us." The discussion continued for some time, with various warriors and elders offering suggestions and debating the best course of action. Freya listened from her position near the hearth, fascinated by this glimpse into the strategic thinking that went into protecting a community. It was Sven who eventually raised a point that changed the direction of the conversation entirely. "My Jarl, there is another matter we must address. The debt that brought Freya Harald's daughter to this household was owed to Jarl Ragnar Ironside. During today's battle, Freya risked her own safety to help protect the children and ensure their evacuation to safety. Several of the mothers have spoken to me about her courage and quick thinking. Such actions go beyond what is required of a thrall and demonstrate the kind of character and loyalty that should be recognized and rewarded. Freya felt every eye in the hall turn toward her, and her cheeks flushed with embarrassment and confusion. She had not thought her actions during the raid were particularly noteworthy. She had simply done what needed to be done, what anyone in her position would have done. Leif's expression was carefully neutral, but Freya could see the calculation in his eyes as he considered Sven's words. "What are you suggesting, Sven?" "I am suggesting that Freya has earned the right to be considered for manumission," Sven replied. "She has served this household faithfully and well for nearly 2 months now. She has demonstrated valuable skills in her work with Olaf, has conducted herself with propriety despite unfounded accusations, and today showed courage in the face of danger. These qualities deserve recognition." Bjarne, one of the more progressive elders, leaned forward with interest. "Manumission would require either payment of the original debt to Jarl Ragnar, or a formal declaration from you, Jarl Leif, that her service has been of sufficient value to warrant freedom. The latter is within your rights as the holder of her bond, but it would require justification that the council would need to approve." Leif was silent for a long moment, and Freya could practically see him weighing the political implications of such a move. Freeing her would remove the most obvious barrier between them, but it would also raise questions about his motivations and potentially validate the accusations that Ragnhild had made. "I propose a middle path," Orm said thoughtfully. "The girl has indeed proven herself valuable, but 2 months is a short time to fully assess character and loyalty. What if we were to grant her a conditional freedom? She would be released from thraldom but would remain in service to this household for a period of, say, 1 year. During that time, she would receive wages for her work, would have the right to leave if she chose, but would be expected to fulfill her duties with the same dedication she has shown thus far. At the end of the year, she would be fully free with no remaining obligations." It was a clever compromise, one that acknowledged Freya's contributions, while also providing time to assess whether this was truly about her merits or about Leif's personal feelings for her. Freya held her breath, waiting to see how Leif would respond to the suggestion. "I find this proposal acceptable," Leif said finally. "Freya has earned the right to be more than property, and the arrangement Orm suggests provides a fair transition. But there is still the matter of the debt owed to Jarl Ragnar. I cannot simply ignore an obligation made in good faith." Sven stepped forward again, and Freya saw a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "As it happens, my Jarl, I have been conducting some investigations into the circumstances of Harold's failed trading expedition. It seems that the raiders who attacked his party were not random opportunists, but were acting on information provided by one of Jarl Ragnar's own men, a warrior who hoped to profit from the goods that were stolen. If this information were to reach Jarl Ragnar, he might be willing to forgive the debt entirely, as it was his own man's treachery that caused the loss." The revelation sent a ripple of surprise through the hall. Freya felt her heart leap with hope even as her mind struggled to process what this might mean. If the debt could be voided, if her father's reputation could be at least partially restored, it would change everything. Leif's eyes narrowed as he considered this new information. "Can you prove these allegations, Sven?" "I have testimony from 2 survivors of the raid who witnessed the betrayal, and I have traced the stolen goods to a merchant who admitted purchasing them from Jarl Ragnar's man," Sven replied. "The evidence is solid enough to bring before a council of Jarls if necessary." Leif nodded slowly, a plan clearly forming in his mind. "Then I will send word to Jarl Ragnar, presenting him with this evidence and requesting that he void the debt in light of his man's treachery. If he agrees, and I believe he will to avoid the scandal and potential challenge to his authority, then Freya will be free of all obligations. Combined with the council's approval of her conditional freedom, this would mean she could choose her own path forward." The words hung in the air, pregnant with possibility. Freya felt tears prickling at her eyes as the full implication of what was being offered sank in. Freedom. True freedom, not just from thraldom, but from the debt that had brought her to this place. The chance to make her own choices, to determine her own future. The council voted unanimously to approve Freya's conditional freedom, and the formal declaration was made that very evening. As Freya stood before the assembled household, Listening to the words that transformed her status from thrall to free woman in service, she felt as if she were living in a dream. The weight that had pressed upon her shoulders since the day she had been taken from her family's home seemed to lift, replaced by a lightness that made her almost dizzy with relief and joy. After the formal proceedings concluded, the hall erupted in celebration. The victory over the raiders combined with this unexpected turn of events created an atmosphere of jubilation that infected everyone present. Warriors who had fought side by side that afternoon now raised their ale horns in toasts. Women who had worked together to protect the children embraced with tears of relief, and even the normally stern elders smiled and shared in the general good feeling that permeated the space. Freya found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Inga hugged her fiercely, tears streaming down her freckled face as she laughed with pure happiness. Thora clasped her hands and spoke words of congratulation and pride. Even Hilda, normally so reserved and controlled, allowed a warm smile to cross her weathered features as she nodded her approval. Only Ragnhild stood apart from the celebrations, her beautiful face twisted with barely concealed fury and resentment. She had lost, comprehensively and publicly, and everyone in the hall knew it. Her attempts to discredit Freya had not only failed, but had ultimately contributed to the very outcome she had sought to prevent. When she caught Freya looking in her direction, she turned and swept from the hall, her posture radiating anger and humiliation. As the evening wore on and the celebrations continued, Leif made his way through the crowd, accepting congratulations for the day's victory and speaking with various members of his household. But Freya noticed that his path was gradually bringing him closer to where she stood, and her pulse quickened in anticipation of what might be said when they finally had a chance to speak. When he finally reached her, the noise and activity of the hall seemed to fade into the background. He stood before her, his gray eyes intense and full of emotions that he could not fully express in this public setting, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Congratulations on your freedom, Freya Harald's daughter," Leif said finally, his voice formal, but with an undercurrent of warmth that only she could detect. "You have earned it through your service and your courage. I trust you will choose to remain with us during your year of service?" "I will, my lord," Freya replied, matching his formal tone even as her heart raced. "I am grateful for the opportunity you have given me, and I will continue to serve this household with all the dedication I possess." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, there and gone so quickly that anyone not watching closely would have missed it. "I am pleased to hear it. Your work with Olaf is invaluable, and I would be sorry to lose you." He paused, then added in a voice so low that only she could hear, "in more ways than one." Before Freya could respond, Sven appeared at Leif's shoulder, his expression suggesting that there were matters requiring the Jarl's attention. Leif excused himself with obvious reluctance, but not before his hand briefly touched hers, a fleeting contact that sent warmth spreading through her entire body. The days following Freya's liberation were strange and wonderful. Her circumstances had changed dramatically, yet in many ways her daily life continued much as before. She still worked with Olaf in the mornings and afternoons, still helped with household tasks when needed, still slept in the women's quarters alongside Inga and the others. But there was a fundamental difference in how she moved through the world now. She was no longer property, but a person in her own right, with choices and agency that had been denied to her before. The response from Jarl Ragnar came more quickly than anyone had expected. A messenger arrived less than a week after Sven's revelations, bearing a formal letter in which Ragnar acknowledged the treachery of his man, expressed his regret for the circumstances that had befallen Harald's family, and officially voided the debt. He also included a sum of silver as compensation for the hardship that had been caused, money that Leif promptly sent to Freya's parents, along with a letter explaining everything that had transpired. When Freya learned of this final piece of the puzzle falling into place, she wept with relief and gratitude. Her father's honor had been restored, at least partially, and her family would no longer suffer under the burden of a debt they could never repay. It was more than she had dared to hope for, more than she had thought possible when she had first arrived at Leif's hall months ago. That evening, as the household settled into the quieter rhythms of night, Freya found herself walking through the settlement, needing air and space to process everything that had happened. She made her way toward the edge of the settlement, to the same spot where she and Leif had spoken that night weeks ago, before Ragnhild's accusations had forced them to maintain distance. She stood looking out over the sea, watching the moonlight dance on the gentle waves, when she heard footsteps behind her, She turned to find Leif approaching, his expression both hopeful and cautious. "I saw you leave the hall," he said as he drew near. "I hoped you might come here, and I hoped you might follow," Freya admitted, no longer seeing any reason to hide the truth of her feelings. "We have maintained propriety and distance as required, but now the circumstances have changed. I am no longer a thrall, no longer bound by the debt that brought me here. What happens next is a choice, not an obligation." Leif closed the distance between them, standing close enough that she could see every detail of his face in the moonlight. "What do you choose, Freya? You are free now, truly free. You could leave this place, return to your family, build a life anywhere you wish. You owe me nothing." "I choose to stay," Freya said without hesitation. "Not because I am obligated to, but because this is where I wish to be. This settlement has become my home, the people here have become my family, and you—" She paused, gathering her courage for what she was about to say. "You have become far more than my Jarl or my employer. You have become the person I think of when I wake and the last thought in my mind before I sleep. You have become essential to my happiness in ways I never expected or imagined." Leif's expression transformed, the careful control he maintained in public falling away to reveal the depth of emotion beneath. "I have wanted to hear you say such words since the first day I saw you walk into my hall with your chin held high and defiance in your eyes. You fascinated me from that first moment, challenged me, made me question things I had never thought to examine. But I could not act on what I felt, could not pursue what my heart wanted, because the power imbalance between us made any relationship impossible. Now, with you free and able to choose your own path, everything changes." He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses from years of wielding weapons. "I am a Jarl, and my position comes with responsibilities and expectations. I will need to marry eventually, to form alliances and produce heirs to secure my legacy. But I want you to know that whoever I might marry for political necessity, it is you who holds my heart. You who I wish to wake beside each morning. You whose counsel I value. You whose happiness matters more to me than my own." Freya felt tears spilling down her cheeks, though whether they were tears of joy or sorrow she could not have said. Then we find ourselves in an impossible situation once again. The obstacles have changed, but they remain nonetheless. You are a Jarl who needs a wife of suitable birth and connections. I am a merchant's daughter with no dowry, no lands, no family alliances to offer. Even free, I cannot be what your position requires." "Perhaps," Leif said, brushing away her tears with his thumbs. "Or perhaps we find a way to change what is required. Sven has been suggesting for some time that I need to consider marriage, and he has presented me with a list of suitable candidates from allied families. But there is no law that says a Jarl must marry only for politics. There is precedent for marriages based on merit and character, on the qualities that make someone a true partner, rather than simply a useful alliance." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers, and Freya closed her eyes, savoring the intimacy of the moment. "I will not rush this," Leif continued softly. "We have time now, time to let our relationship develop naturally, time to let the household and the community become accustomed to seeing us together. But I want you to know my intentions, Freya. I want you to understand that when I look at you, I see not just a woman I desire, but the person I want beside me for the rest of my life. And I want you to know," Freya replied, opening her eyes to meet his intense gaze, "that when I look at you I see the man who changed my fate, who gave me hope when I had none, who saw value in me when others saw only a debt to be paid. Whatever the future holds, whatever obstacles we must overcome, I choose to face them with you." Leif smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to breathtaking. Then slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wished, he lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he feared she might disappear if he held her too tightly. But as Freya melted into his embrace, as her arms came up to circle his neck, the kiss deepened, becoming a promise and a claim and a celebration all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Leif rested his chin on top of her head, holding her close against his chest. Freya could hear the steady beat of his heart, could feel the rise and fall of his breathing, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. "There will be challenges ahead," Leif said quietly. "There are those in the household who will not approve. who will see our relationship as inappropriate regardless of your changed status. The elders may resist the idea of me marrying someone without significant family connections. And there will always be political pressures to consider marriages that strengthen alliances rather than follow the heart. I know, Freya replied, but we have already overcome so much. We faced accusations and suspicions. We maintained our integrity when it would have been easier to give in to temptation, and we found a way to free me from bondage without compromising your position or reputation. If we can survive all of that, we can survive whatever comes next. Over the following weeks and months, their relationship continued to develop, though always with careful attention to propriety and the expectations of their community. Leif began to include Freya in discussions of settlement matters, valuing her insights and perspectives on issues ranging from trade negotiations to diplomatic relations with neighboring communities. Her intelligence and education, the very qualities that had made her valuable as a scribe, now proved equally valuable in matters of governance. Sven became an unexpected ally, speaking openly in council about Freya's merits and the value she brought to Leif's household. He pointed out that her background as a merchant's daughter gave her knowledge of trade and commerce that could benefit the settlement, that her ability to read and write in multiple languages made her invaluable for diplomatic correspondence, and that her courage during the raid had proven her loyalty beyond any doubt. Gradually, the resistance to their relationship began to soften. The household had seen them together for months now, had witnessed their careful observance of propriety, had noted how Freya never overstepped or presumed on her position. Even some of those who had initially been skeptical began to acknowledge that perhaps this match was not as unsuitable as they had first believed. Ragnhild had left the settlement shortly after Freya's liberation, accepting a position in another household where her beauty and household skills might be better appreciated. Her departure removed one major source of tension, though Freya knew there would always be those who questioned or resented her relationship with Leif. As summer turned to autumn and the settlement prepared for the coming winter, Leif called another gathering of the household and elders. Freya stood among the assembled people, her heart racing as she wondered what announcement he was about to make. "My friends and counselors," Leif began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, "I have called you here to discuss a matter of great importance. As you know, it has been suggested to me many times that I should marry, that I should secure alliances and produce heirs to ensure the stability and prosperity of our community. I have given this matter considerable thought, and I have made my decision." He paused, his eyes finding Freya's across the crowded hall, and she saw love and determination blazing in those storm-gray depths. "I intend to ask Freya Haraldsdottir to be my wife. She is a woman of intelligence, courage, and integrity. She has proven her worth to this household many times over, and she has earned the respect and affection of those who know her best. I believe she will make an excellent partner in all aspects of life and governance, and I ask for your blessing on this union." A murmur ran through the assembled crowd, some voices raised in support, others in question or concern. Orm stood, his white beard gleaming in the firelight, and all fell silent to hear what the eldest counselor would say. "Jarl Leif," Orm began, his voice grave but not hostile, "you ask us to approve a marriage that breaks with tradition and expectation. Freya is indeed a woman of many admirable qualities, but she brings no lands, no alliances, no dowry that would strengthen our position in the region. Can you justify this choice to those who depend on your leadership?" Leif met the old man's gaze without flinching. "I can, and I will. Freya brings something more valuable than lands or alliances. She brings wisdom, literacy, and diplomatic skills that will serve this community well. She brings courage proven in battle and loyalty tested through hardship. And she brings the kind of partnership that will make me a better leader, not through political maneuvering, but through genuine support and counsel. Is that not worth more than a connection to some distant jarl whose loyalty would be conditional at best?" Bjarne rose to stand beside Orm, his expression thoughtful. "The jarl makes a fair point. We have seen Freya's contributions to this household, have witnessed her character through both adversity and triumph. Perhaps it is time we recognize that strength comes not just from traditional alliances, but from the quality of the people we choose to surround ourselves with." One by one, others began to speak, offering their perspectives on the proposed marriage. To Freya's surprise and gratitude, many spoke in support, citing her work with Olaf, her courage during the raid, and the respect she had earned through her conduct. Even those who had reservations acknowledged that Leif had the right to make this choice and that Freya had proven herself worthy of consideration. Finally, Orm raised his hand for silence. It is clear that opinion is divided, but I think I speak for the majority when I say this. We trust your judgment, Jarl Leif. You have led us well, have protected us in battle and guided us in peace. If you believe that Freya Harald's daughter is the right choice for your wife and for the future of this community, then we will support that choice. You have our blessing. The hall erupted in cheers and applause, and Freya felt her knees go weak with relief and joy. Leif crossed the hall in long strides, taking her hands in his as he knelt before her in front of everyone assembled. Freya Harald's daughter, he said, his voice strong and clear and full of emotion, will you consent to be my wife, to stand beside me as partner and equal, to share in both the joys and burdens of leadership, and to build a future together that honors both our hearts and our responsibilities? Freya looked down at this powerful man kneeling before her, offering her everything he had to give, and she felt her heart swell with love so intense it was almost painful. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, I will marry you, Leif Stormborn. I will stand beside you, support you, challenge you when needed, and love you for all the days of my life. Leif rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply as the hall erupted in celebration around them. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, they were surrounded by well-wishers, offering congratulations and blessings. The wedding was held a month later, on a crisp autumn day when the sky was clear and blue, and the sea sparkled in the sunlight. Freya wore a dress of deep blue wool embroidered with silver thread, a gift from the women of the household who had worked together to create something beautiful for the occasion. Her honey-colored hair was braided in an elaborate style and crowned with a circlet of autumn flowers. Leif stood waiting for her at the threshold of the great hall, magnificent in his finest clothing, his dark hair newly trimmed and his gray eyes shining with happiness as he watched her approach. The ceremony was conducted by the eldest priest, following the ancient traditions of their people, binding them together before the gods and their community. As they spoke their vows, promising to honor and cherish each other through all the challenges that life might bring, Freya thought back to that first day when she had arrived at this settlement as a frightened thrall, payment for her father's debt, with no hope for the future. She remembered her first sight of Leif, so different from what she had expected, and the way her heart had responded to him even then. She thought of all the obstacles they had overcome, the accusations and suspicions, the political complexities, the social barriers that had seemed insurmountable. They had navigated all of it with patience and integrity, refusing to compromise their principles even when it would have been easier to give in to temptation or despair. And now here they stood, joined before their community, ready to face the future together as partners and equals. It was more than she had ever dared to dream, more than she had thought possible when her life had seemed to be defined by circumstance and obligation. The celebration that followed the ceremony lasted well into the night, with feasting and music and dancing that brought together everyone in the settlement. Freya found herself surrounded by people who had become dear to her over the months. Inga and Thora, Hilda and Olaf, Sven and Gunnar, and so many others who had supported her journey from thrall to free woman to the wife of their Jarl. As the evening wore on and the celebrations began to wind down, Leif took her hand and led her away from the hall toward the private chambers that would now be theirs to share. They walked in comfortable silence, fingers intertwined, both still overwhelmed by the joy and significance of the day. "Are you happy?" Leif asked as they paused at the threshold of their new life together. Freya turned to face him, seeing in his eyes all the love and hope and promise that their future held. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "You changed my fate, Leif. You took what should have been a story of loss and bondage and transformed it into something beautiful. You gave me not just freedom, but a home, a purpose, and a love that sustains and strengthens me. We changed each other's fates," Leif corrected gently, pulling her close. "You made me see beyond duty and tradition to what truly matters. You challenged me to be better, to think more deeply, to lead with both strength and compassion. Whatever the future holds, whatever challenges we face, we will face them together, as we have from the beginning." And as they crossed the threshold into their shared future, Freya knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world, had discovered the love and partnership that would sustain her through all the years to come. She had been given to a Viking lord as punishment for her father's failures, but that circumstance had led her to a destiny far greater than anything she could have imagined. She had found not just freedom, but purpose, community, and a love that would endure through all the trials and triumphs that lay ahead. Their story had begun with debt and obligation, but it would continue with choice and love, a testament to the power of courage, patience, and the willingness to see beyond circumstance to the person within. And as they embarked on this new chapter together, both knew that they had found in each other exactly what they needed: a partner, a companion, and a love that would last all their days.